Today I'll be animating a ball in 4 different genres. Now, I did animate a ball in 5 feelings a year ago, so this is similar, but I'll make sure not to double up on themes. So no horror for this one. And the first genre we're going to tackle is... One of the key components here is going to be a very extreme squash and stretch. Have the ball really just slam into the ground. Maybe do a bit of a wrinkly, piled up shape. Obviously I'll try and draw it better than that. I think the environment or background is also going to play a big part. The element of surprise, sound design, I think it's all going to come together. Basically, I'm going to try and make it funny. So I drew this little character and he's just going to stand there while the ball bounces in, preparing to catch it. I made a reference ball bounce with a circle and tweens, which I'm going to draw over and incorporate some nice squash and stretch. This little guy's just going to be vibrating on the spot. For the squash frames, I wanted it to be really wrinkled up and flat. That just seems funnier to me. Then the stretch is of course extremely thin and long. The squash wasn't enough and the volume looked wrong, so I drew it again even flatter. There's definitely still too much volume there, but it's not like realism is important for this. I continued tracing over the ball until it gets close to the character and stops mid-air. The timing on the bounces was a little boring, so I made more sharp easing by reducing the frames on the way up and down. Then I colored it red. The next part I'm going to leave a surprise, so the final animation is actually effective. But after that I gave it a yellow background for an eye-popping color combination. And finally some sound effects. Hopefully that was funny. It's the kind of thing that could get a chuckle out of me. I think the sound really helps it along, but I like to think it's still effective in silence. Kept the background and character very basic, which I think works in its favor. Well, now I gotta work on the second genre, which is... To get that adventure vibe, we're gonna have a ball rolling along these hills and jumping a big gap. But I also wanted a seamless loop, so I made a copy of the same hill. Getting the right speed, easing, and positioning as it moves through these arcs was quite tricky. I tried using motion paths the whole way, but that's no good because you can't control the vertical and horizontal movement separately. So I ended up doing several tweens stitched together section by section. Then I made some placeholder background graphics and worked on the camera movement. I had 5 layers of parallax and had to make sure everything ended at the same place it started for the loop. I also did a bit of zoom in and out to give more sense of movement overall. Now the polished artwork for the midground before drawing the actual ball animation. It can stretch and squash during the fastest parts of motion and where it hits the ground. The placeholder animation wasn't too precise, so I adjusted the positions accordingly. I coloured it orange for a bit of contrast. Then worked on the background and decided to paint the sky in Photoshop. I drew some lighting on the ball before bringing it into Premiere Pro. In there I added a lens flare as we passed the sun and a vignette. Then a whole bunch of sound effects to finish it off. That turned out pretty good. I like the ramping up of speed as it goes down the hill and makes the jump. But I do think maybe it was too slow overall. The part between landing and hitting the slope. I like the small bounces and just the adventurous feeling of it all. Probably could have done more with the background, but that's not really the point. Anyway, we're going to move on to the third genre, which will be... The premise for this one is a ball bouncing on the top of some tall buildings at incredible speed. I made one building graphic, which I'll add detail to later. Then copied it a few times and made 3 layers at different depths for parallax as the camera follows the ball. At the end it'll smash through the window of a taller building, then restart the loop. So I started animating the ball, then added some windows to the buildings. After that I spent quite some time trying to get the camera movement and positioning of everything just right, so that the motion looks good and the loop works well. Then it's time to draw the final animation frame by frame. First off though, the smashing through the window. I made a few impact frames with a black background and white rushing lines traced around the building and ball. Next I animated some glass shards flying off, using simple shapes with white outlines and transparent black innards, as well as some smaller specks. Now for the ball animation. I traced it with some amount of stretch all the way across because of how fast it's moving, of course dialing it back towards the apex of each jump. I coloured it blue, giving a kind of monochromatic scene, and added some scratchy highlights. I also animated a dust cloud to enhance the impact, as well as speed lines on the way there so it feels more intense. In Photoshop, I painted another sky. This time it's more of a morning look. Not really associated with action, but I think it looks cool. Then sound effects and a vignette to tie everything together. Yeah, I think that's pretty intense and actiony. It's kind of silly just as a concept. A big ball flying across a city and smashing through a window. I do think you get a good sense of the motion and impact. And hey, another seamless loop. That was kind of finicky. I actually quite like the wobbliness of the ball. That just naturally occurred from me drawing every single frame by frame. Just makes it look more like it's actually moving through the air, and having all these forces applied. Well, let's move on to genre number 4, which is... I started off animating a normal bounce onto the screen, akin to the comedy one but less goofy. But then it's going to transform into a sci-fi ball. I just googled sci-fi ball and took inspiration from that. Hey, that looks pretty futuristic. Next I traced over the ball as per usual. But at the end it stops and floats up and down. Then it was time to animate the transformation. I had the white panels emerge and flap down while the circle grows from the middle. The darker parts roll in from the edges and the light sort of dissolves in. Once I was happy with the transformation, I added placeholder backgrounds for 2 shots. This is because the ball teleports into space and floats away. To animate it teleporting in, I filled up the ball area gradually with a liquid sort of thing, then the white fades out. I used the reverse animation to show it teleporting away. Then I animated some more effects on top. Now for the backgrounds. We start off in a normal earth environment, so I drew some grass with dirt patches all over it, using various brushes and opacity to give it texture, then shading. The sky is just an average day, and I drew a line of trees in the back. Then a small hill, some trees in the distance, and clouds. For the space background I filled it in with black and brushed on a bunch of colours. Then I drew this big bright galaxy or something, not sure, it's just vibes. Painted in some pink nebulas, then a whole lot of stars in various sizes. And 2 extra big stars with a glow. After putting everything together, I of course completed it with an array of sounds. Alright, that turned out nicely. Not sure if there's anything I regret there. There's room for more detail and polish, but I'm okay with what we have. The idea as a whole, maybe you guys would have come up with something better, but I think this was a pretty interesting route to take, and that's that. So, a ball animated in 4 genres. I know some of you might be thinking the genres really came through in the sounds and the other things happening aside from the animation of the actual ball. But I think there were elements of the genre in the pure ball animation itself in each one. And I like to think of it more as I'm making a scene around that object in that genre. Anyway, I think that went pretty well. Hope you guys enjoyed. I will see you in another video soon, and goodbye.